The Tennessee winter was uncommonly bitter that December of 1862. Our regiment had been dispatched to scout the western ridge of the Cumberland Mountains, ostensibly to determine if Confederate forces were using the remote passes to move supplies. I served as clerk to Captain Harlow, documenting our expedition as we departed from the main camp near Murfreesboro. 12 of us set out before dawn, our breath hanging in the frozen air. The horses were uneasy from the start. I remember thinking it strange how no birds called in those woods. The first tracks we found weren't made by any Confederate scout or supply wagon. They were bare footprints in the frozen mud, each one nearly twice the length of a man's boot and deeper than seemed possible. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. Captain Harlow was a methodical man, a surveyor before the war. He insisted we document everything precisely, which is why I carried my writing case even as we ventured deeper into those mountains. "Denning, record what we find exactly as we find it," he told me that first morning. "The War Department will want a full accounting." I did not know then that my official report would later be filed with significant redactions, or that I would keep this separate private record that no one in authority has ever seen. Our company consisted of Captain Harlow, myself, Lieutenant Corwin, Sergeant Briscoe, and 8 enlisted men, including Morris, who had trapped in these mountains before the war. The others were Walsh, Peters, Kimball, Stowe, Fletcher, Holloway, and young Carter, who had only joined the regiment 3 weeks prior. Carter couldn't have been more than 17, though he had claimed 19 when he enlisted. His hands shook constantly during that journey, though whether from the cold or from fear, I never determined. Morris was the first to notice the silence. "These woods ain't right," he said as we made camp that first night. "Should be hearing fox, owl, something." He poked at our small fire with a stick, his weathered face tight with concern. "Ain't natural for a forest to be this quiet in winter." "Perhaps the rebels have been hunting through here," offered Lieutenant Corwin, a banker's son from Philadelphia who approached warfare like a business transaction. "Depleting the game," Morris shook his head. "Ain't about game. It's about what's keeping the game away." We posted double watches that night. I shared the midnight shift with Stowe, a former blacksmith whose massive hands made my writing pen look like a toothpick when he once borrowed it to sketch a modification for the wagon wheels. We sat in silence for 2 hours, the fire burning down to embers. Twice, I thought I heard something moving in the underbrush beyond our camp, but Stowe claimed to hear nothing. The next morning, we found the first footprints. Captain Harlow knelt beside them, measuring with his folding rule. 14 inches, heel to toe, he said quietly. Depth indicates considerable weight. The prints led from a rocky outcropping down toward a small stream and then back into the dense forest to the north. "Could be a bear," suggested Kimball, though his tone lacked conviction. Morris spat into the dead leaves. "No bear makes prints like that. Those are feet. Man feet, but no man I ever known." "Perhaps some kind of snowshoe?" offered Lieutenant Corwin. "Indians sometimes craft them to disguise their numbers." Morris looked at him with something between pity and contempt. "There ain't been Cherokee in these parts for 30 years, Lieutenant, not since the removal. And these ain't snowshoe prints. Look at the toe marks." I bent closer. Indeed, 5 distinct toe impressions were visible in each print, splayed wide like fingers. The stride length measured nearly 4 feet between impressions. No man could walk with such a gait. Captain Harlow decided we would follow the prints, reasoning that if someone was in these mountains, Confederate scout or otherwise, we needed to determine their purpose. Morris objected, quietly but firmly. "Some things in these mountains best left alone, Captain," he said. "We have our orders, Morris," Harlow replied. "Intelligence gathering is our mission." "Some intelligence ain't worth the gathering." Captain Harlow's spine stiffened. "This is a military operation, not a hunting expedition governed by woodsman's superstitions. We will proceed as ordered." Morris fell silent, but I noticed how he checked his rifle and kept it at the ready as we moved out. Young Carter stayed close to him, seemingly drawing comfort from the older man's experience. We followed the tracks for 3 miles, heading deeper into increasingly rugged terrain. The forest grew denser, old-growth oak and hickory giving way to pine and twisted mountain laurel that tore at our uniforms. The horses became increasingly difficult to manage, rolling their eyes and fighting the bit at every step. Near midday, Sergeant Briscoe's mount reared suddenly, throwing him against a tree trunk with enough force to crack 2 ribs. We fashioned a makeshift brace from canvas strapping, but it was clear he could not continue at our pace. Captain Harlow detailed Fletcher and Holloway to escort Briscoe back to the main camp. "Report our position and heading," he instructed. "Inform command we are pursuing unknown individuals in the highlands. We will continue forward and complete our reconnaissance." I remember Fletcher's expression as they departed, relief poorly disguised as concern for Briscoe. Something in the atmosphere of those mountains affected all of us, a pressure behind the eyes like the moments before a violent thunderstorm. The silence had only deepened as we ascended. No wind moved in the upper branches. No insects chirped in the rotting logs we passed. The world felt held in suspension, waiting. That night we made camp in a small hollow. The horses refused to settle, trembling and pulling at their tethers. Twice we heard rocks tumbling down the ridge face above us, though nothing was visible in the darkness beyond our fire's reach. Morris insisted on keeping the flames low. "Don't want to be seen," he muttered. "By whom?" demanded Lieutenant Corwin. "If Confederate forces are present, we are here to engage them." Morris looked at him. "Not talking about rebels." Walsh, normally taciturn, spoke up from where he sat cleaning his rifle. "My grandfather fought Indians in Kentucky. Said there were stories about something in these mountains, something old. Called it different names, but said it walked like a man but wasn't one." "Folk tales," Corwin dismissed, "designed to frighten children and gullible soldiers." "Then what made those tracks?" asked Stowe. "No bear I ever seen." "Perhaps a woodland buffalo," suggested Corwin, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or moose displaced from northern territories." "Ain't no moose this far south," said Morris. "And buffalo don't walk on 2 legs. Captain Harlow intervened. "Enough speculation. We'll continue tracking at first light. Double watches again tonight." I shared the middle watch with Kimball this time. 2 hours of stillness, broken only by the occasional shifting of the horses. Near the end of our watch, a sound came from the darkness, a long, low whistle that seemed to vibrate the air itself. It wasn't a bird call or any animal sound I recognized. It was almost musical, but with dissonant notes that made my skin prickle. Kimball and I both reached for our rifles. "What was that?" he whispered. The sound came again, closer, echoing strangely so that I couldn't determine its direction. The horses whinnied in fear, one of them rearing so violently it nearly broke its tether. We woke the camp. Captain Harlow ordered us into defensive positions around the perimeter. For an hour we waited, rifles ready, as the sound repeated from different directions, sometimes seeming to come from directly overhead, other times from the ground itself. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whistling stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. None of us slept for the remainder of the night. At dawn, Peters discovered fresh tracks circling our camp, the same huge bare footprints, but now they formed a complete ring around our position, as if whatever made them had paced a perfect circle around us as we huddled by our fire. "It was watching us," said Morris quietly. Captain Harlow studied the tracks with his usual methodical attention, but I noticed his hands weren't entirely steady as he made measurements. "The stride length is consistent with our previous findings," he said. "Whatever made these, it's the same individual we've been tracking." "We ain't been tracking it," said Morris. "It's been tracking us." Lieutenant Corwin scoffed, but there was fear behind his eyes. "This is absurd. We are 9 armed soldiers of the United States Army. What possible threat could one—" He hesitated. "Individual pose?" 9 men with single-shot rifles," Morris replied, "and something that knows these mountains better than any of us." Young Carter spoke up, his voice cracking. "Sir, perhaps we should return to the main camp, report what we found." Captain Harlow considered this. I could see the conflict in his expression, the military man wanting to complete the assigned mission versus the growing awareness that we faced something outside the parameters of ordinary warfare. "We'll continue for 1 more day," he decided. "If we find no conclusive evidence of who or what is out there, we'll return and make our report." I noticed Morris checking his ammunition pouch and tucking his skinning knife into his boot. When he caught me watching, he simply nodded, as if confirming something we both already knew. We were being hunted. The tracks led upward toward a ridgeline of exposed limestone that gleamed pale in the winter sun. The trail was becoming easier to follow, not just footprints now, but broken branches, disturbed earth, and twice smears of a dark substance on tree trunks that Kimball suggested might be pitch or resin, but which Morris refused to touch or even examine closely. Near midday, we found the remains of a deer. Not killed by normal predators, it had been torn apart, its limbs wrenched from their sockets rather than chewed. The carcass was fresh, perhaps only hours old. More disturbing were the clear signs that it had been handled by something with opposable thumbs. The rib cage had been spread open, not by teeth but by hands. Several organs were missing. "It's eating," said Morris flatly. "Getting stronger." Lieutenant Corwin turned away, his face gone gray beneath his beard. Even Captain Harlow seemed shaken. "We'll proceed with caution," he said. "Formation distance. No one is to become separated from the group." The horses were nearly unmanageable now. Peter's mount bolted despite his expert handling, crashing through the underbrush before we heard a shrill, terrified whinny that cut off abruptly. Peter started after it, but Captain Harlow ordered him to remain with the group. We secured the remaining horses as best we could and continued on foot. As we neared the ridgeline, the forest thinned. Massive boulders stood like sentinels among the trees, some balanced precariously on stone outcroppings, others half buried in the earth. Many were marked with the same dark substance we had seen on the trees. Morris moved differently now, all pretense of military formation abandoned for the careful stalk of an experienced hunter. But I had the distinct impression he considered us the prey, not the predator, in this scenario. We reached a clearing as the afternoon sun began to wane. Before us stood what appeared to be a crude structure, not a cabin or traditional shelter, but a framework of saplings bent and woven together, reinforced with stones and covered partially with what looked like hides. The construction was sophisticated in its understanding of tension and weight distribution, yet primitive in its materials. It stood nearly 10 feet tall at its apex. "Hold position," ordered Captain Harlow, but his command was barely necessary. None of us seemed eager to approach the structure. Walsh raised his rifle, aiming at the dark opening that served as an entrance. "Something moved inside," he whispered. "Hold your fire," said Captain Harlow. "We need to determine—" The whistling sound came again, but this time from behind us. We turned as one, rifles raised. Nothing visible moved among the trees, but I felt it, a presence, watching. The hairs on my arms stood straight despite the cold. "It's circling us again," said Morris, cutting off retreat. "There's at least 2 of them," added Stowe, his rifle sweeping the tree line. Captain Harlow made a decision. "We'll approach the structure. If someone or something is using it as shelter, we need to identify them. Morris, Peters, with me. The rest of you maintain perimeter defense." I should have stayed with the defensive line. My role as clerk did not require me to approach potential enemy positions, but something compelled me to follow. Perhaps the same curiosity that had led me to volunteer as Captain Harlow's adjutant in the first place, or perhaps just the irrational fear of being separated from the group. Either way, I found myself trailing behind as the 3 men approached the strange shelter. The interior was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, details emerged. The floor was packed earth covered with more hides, deer primarily, but others I couldn't identify. At the center lay a circle of stones containing the ashes of fires. Along one wall hung an array of objects that at first seemed random, but gradually revealed a disturbing pattern. Items of human manufacture arranged by type. Buttons in one grouping, buckles in another. Metal objects, spoons, forks, a pocket watch in a third. Most chilling was a collection of what appeared to be human teeth, arranged in precise rows. And there were bones. Many bones, some animal, some unmistakably human. A partial human skull sat atop a flat stone, positioned as if it were overlooking the entire grotesque display. "Jesus Christ," whispered Peters. Captain Harlow maintained his composure, though I could see the pulse jumping in his neck. "Document this," he ordered me quietly. "Exactly as you see it." I fumbled with my notebook, my fingers stiff with cold and fear. As I sketched the interior arrangement, Morris knelt to examine something on the ground. "Captain," he said, his voice tight. "This is fresh." He pointed to a uniform button, polished bright, lying beside the fire circle. It matched those on Fletcher's jacket, one of the men we had sent back with the injured Sergeant Briscoe. The realization struck us simultaneously. Whatever inhabited this place had encountered our returning party. The fact that we had found only a button suggested the encounter had not ended well for our comrades. "We need to leave," said Morris. "Now." Captain Harlow nodded, his decision immediate. "Back to the defensive line. We're withdrawing." We backed out of the structure, rifles ready. The remaining men were where we had left them, tense and alert, watching the forest. Young Carter's face was pale, his rifle shaking visibly in his hands. "We're pulling back," ordered Captain Harlow. "Tactical withdrawal to the valley. Maintain formation. Watch all approaches." We hadn't taken 3 steps when the whistling began again, not from one direction but from all around us, as if the forest itself were producing the sound. It rose in pitch and intensity until it was nearly painful to hear. The horses still with us broke free of their tethers, bolting in terror. Then we saw it. Or rather, I caught a glimpse of something moving with terrible speed between 2 massive boulders. It was tall, far taller than any man, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. The skin was not flesh-colored, but a mottled gray-brown that blended with the winter forest. I saw no clothing, no equipment, just raw physicality that spoke of immense strength. The face I could not make out clearly, though I sensed eyes watching us with terrible intelligence. Walsh fired. The shot echoed across the clearing. A moment of silence followed, then the whistling resumed, now with a quality that could only be described as angry. "Move!" shouted Captain Harlow. "Fall back!" We ran. There is no other word for it, no military terminology that could disguise the nature of our retreat. We abandoned all pretense of formation or dignity and simply fled down the mountain as fast as our legs could carry us. I remember the pounding of my heart, the gasping of my breath, the scratch of branches across my face as we crashed through the underbrush. Behind us came sounds of pursuit, not just footfalls, but crashes, as if boulders were being hurled aside. The whistling continued, now accompanied by a deeper sound, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the ground itself. Walsh fell first. He caught his foot in a root and went down hard. Lieutenant Corwin and Stowe stopped to help him up. I paused, looking back. In that moment, something massive moved at the edge of my vision. Lieutenant Corwin screamed, the only time I ever heard him make such a sound. He was lifted bodily from the ground, his rifle falling uselessly as he rose into the air, struggling against something I could not clearly see in the gathering dusk. Stowe fired upward. Walsh scrambled to his feet. A terrible cracking sound followed, wet and final. Lieutenant Corwin stopped struggling. Something dark and glistening fell to the ground near my feet. I realized with horror it was his arm, torn completely from his body. Captain Harlow grabbed my shoulder. "Run!" he ordered. "Don't look back!" We ran. Darkness was falling rapidly now, making the forest treacherous. I heard Walsh scream behind us, then Stowe's rifle firing repeatedly until it stopped abruptly. Young Carter sobbed as he ran, a continuous keen of terror that seemed to draw our pursuer. We reached a steep embankment leading down to a fast-moving stream. Captain Harlow made a split-second decision. "Into the water," he ordered. "It may mask our scent, our trail." The shock of the icy water nearly stopped my heart. The current was strong, threatening to sweep us away. We fought downstream, half wading, half swimming, the freezing water numbing our limbs. Behind us, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent again. For nearly an hour, we followed the stream, eventually reaching a point where it widened and slowed. Captain Harlow led us to the opposite bank. Only 5 of us remained: the captain, Morris, Kimball, young Carter, and myself. Peters had disappeared somewhere in our headlong flight through the forest. We collapsed on the rocky shore, soaked and freezing. The temperature was dropping rapidly with nightfall. Without fire, we risked hypothermia, but none of us suggested making camp or starting flames that might reveal our position. "What was that thing?" Kimball finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Morris shook his head. "Old folks called them different names: mountain men, wild men, forest devils. They've been in these highlands longer than any of us, longer than the Cherokee even. They keep to themselves mostly up in the high places, until someone crosses into their territory." "That's impossible," said Captain Harlow, though his voice lacked conviction. "Some kind of large predator, perhaps. A bear standing on hind legs in poor visibility." "You saw it same as I did, Captain," interrupted Morris. "That weren't no bear that took Corwin apart like that. That was something that knew what it was doing, something that's been watching us, learning our movements, something that thinks." Young Carter began to shake uncontrollably. Whether from cold or terror, I couldn't tell. Kimball put an arm around him, trying to share what little body heat remained. "We need to keep moving," said Captain Harlow. "Find shelter, make our way back to the main camp." "Not tonight," said Morris firmly. "We move in this darkness, we'll break legs or get separated. And that's if they don't find us first. Dawn is 5 hours away. We stay together, stay quiet, move when we can see." For perhaps the first time in our acquaintance, Captain Harlow deferred to the older man's expertise without argument. We huddled together for warmth, taking turns watching while others tried to rest. None of us slept. The night sounds gradually returned. A distant owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Normal forest sounds that somehow only emphasized how abnormal the previous silence had been. At first light, we rose stiffly, our clothes still damp and now partially frozen. Kimball discovered a crude path following the stream that showed signs of occasional human use, trappers perhaps, or local hunters. We followed it downstream, moving as quickly as our exhaustion allowed. By midday, we encountered a small farmstead, a rough cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. The elderly man who answered our knock took one look at our bedraggled state and ushered us inside without questions. His wife, equally weathered, silently provided hot coffee and cornbread while we warmed ourselves by their fire. Only when Captain Harlow began to explain our presence did the old man hold up a gnarled hand to stop him. "Don't need to tell me where you've been," he said. "Seen it in your eyes already. You went up into the high ridges, east side of Bald Mountain, where the stones stand up like men." Morris nodded slowly. "And you seen something up there," continued the old man. "Something that ain't rightly meant to be seen." "What are they?" asked Captain Harlow, abandoning all pretense of military detachment. The old man considered for a long moment, then spoke. "They was here before us. Before anyone. They keep to their places mostly. Don't bother folks that don't bother them." He looked directly at Morris. "But when someone goes where they ain't wanted, brings noise and fire and shooting irons. Well, they protect what's theirs." "But what are they?" persisted Captain Harlow. The old woman spoke for the first time, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "Doesn't matter what they are. Only matters that you leave them be." The old couple allowed us to rest for several hours, providing clean water to treat our cuts and scratches. They refused payment, asking only that we mark the eastern ridgelines as unsuitable for military operations on our maps. Captain Harlow agreed without hesitation. They directed us to a road that would take us back toward Murfreesboro. Before we left, the old man took Morris aside. I couldn't hear what was said, but when Morris rejoined us, his face was grave. We reached the main camp 3 days later. Our official report listed Lieutenant Corwin, Walsh, Stowe, Peters, Fletcher, and Holloway as missing in action, presumed killed by Confederate irregulars. Sergeant Briscoe was never found, nor was any trace of his escorts. Captain Harlow documented the terrain as unsuitable for troop movements or supply lines due to unstable geological formations and hazardous conditions. No mention was made of footprints or whistling or things that moved too quickly through the winter woods. No description was given of the strange shelter with its collection of human artifacts. The War Department accepted our incomplete report without question, more concerned with the approaching battle at Stones River than with the fate of a small reconnaissance party in the remote highlands. Young Carter never recovered from our expedition. He was discharged 3 months later, citing nervous exhaustion. I encountered him 2 years after the war ended in a Cincinnati boarding house. He didn't recognize me at first. When he did, he began to tremble uncontrollably. He told me he still heard the whistling in his dreams. Captain Harlow remained in the Army until 1868, but requested assignments that kept him far from the Appalachian Range. Kimball returned to his native Maine and, according to his letters, never again ventured into deep forests. Morris simply disappeared after the war. Whether he returned to the mountains or fled as far from them as possible, I never learned. As for myself, I've built a life in Chicago, as distant from the Tennessee highlands as circumstances allow. I married, raised children, established a small publishing concern. I am respected in my community. Yet even now, 38 years later, I wake sometimes in the coldest hours of night, hearing that distinctive whistle. I keep my detailed account of those December days locked in my desk drawer. Occasionally, I consider destroying it, but something prevents me. Perhaps the scholar's instinct to preserve knowledge, however terrible. Perhaps the survivor's need to validate what cannot be explained. I know this much. What we encountered was not a bear, nor a Confederate scout, nor any recognized woodland creature. It walked on two legs, used tools, collected human artifacts, and killed with terrible purpose and efficiency. It defended territory it considered its own against what it perceived as invaders, and it is still there. Of this, I have no doubt. In 1897, I received a newspaper clipping from an anonymous sender. It described the disappearance of a geological survey team in the same region where our expedition had ventured. The article mentioned unusual tracks and unexplained sounds reported by the lone survivor. There are places in this world where humans are not meant to go. There are boundaries we are not meant to cross. In the chaos and bloodshed of the Civil War, our small encounter with something ancient and territorial was barely noted, quickly forgotten by all except those few of us who survived. But I remember. I remember the silence of those woods. I remember the whistling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And I remember the glimpse, just a glimpse, of something tall and powerful moving with purpose through the winter trees, protecting what had always been its own. The official records of the Civil War make no mention of what we encountered in the Tennessee Highlands in December 1862. This account will never appear in any history book. Yet it happened, as surely as Stones River or Gettysburg or any other documented battle of that terrible conflict. Some wars are fought between nations, conducted under flags and recorded by historians. Others are more ancient, more primal, the defense of territory against intruders, the protection of boundaries as old as the mountains themselves. In such conflicts, humans are rarely the victors. I have never returned to Tennessee. I never will. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind blows a certain way, I find myself listening for a sound I pray never to hear again.